The Notorious Empire, How Brothels Built the Wild West. The history books love to talk about the gunfighters, the gold rushes, and the cattle trails that defined the American Wild West. But beneath the surface of that mythology, another kind of empire was quietly being built. It was an institution that was illegal, yet economically essential and openly tolerated, the notorious frontier brothel. These were more than just dens of vice. They were complex economic engines, social hubs, and centers of political corruption that fundamentally shaped the boomtowns of the mid to late 19th century. The women who ran these establishments, the madams, were often shrewd businesswomen who built fortunes, operating with an iron fist cloaked in velvet. We're not just going to talk about famous outlaws today. We're going to pull back the gilded curtain on the frontier's most lucrative and morally complex enterprise. We'll explore the demographic perfect storm that created the vice trade, the surprising economics that made it an indispensable tax base for struggling towns, and the strict three-tiered hierarchy that dictated a woman's entire life on the frontier. Finally, we'll dive into the shocking stories of the most iconic madams, women like Fanny Porter, who harbored the Wild Bunch, and Mattie Silks, who settled a professional dispute with a pistol duel. By the end of this, you'll see the Wild West not just as a place of rugged men, but as a surprisingly sophisticated, if morally conflicted, economy built on gold, liquor, and the soiled doves who made their living in its red light districts. The genesis of vice, how the West created the demand. The explosion of the commercial sex industry in the Wild West was a direct result of the unique conditions of westward expansion. Prostitution wasn't a side issue. It was an indispensable part of the frontier's entire socioeconomic structure. The man shortage and the gold standard of vice. The primary fuel for the vice industry was the profound gender imbalance. Places like mining camps and railroad towns were overwhelmingly male. If you look at the first California census in 1850, it documented that women made up less than 10% of the entire population. This extreme scarcity created a massive demand for sexual services and fundamentally transformed the commerce of any woman who entered the trade. The industry grew hand in glove with the industrial development and capitalism of the mining regions. As gold and metal were discovered, towns like Deadwood and Cripple Creek sprang up overnight, filled with thousands of single men. These men had disposable income, either from successful mining or simply seeking relaxation after a long day of labor. This meant that a woman in the sex trade could often earn in a single day what she might otherwise earn in an entire week as a factory worker or a clerk. The financial opportunity was unparalleled. Compounding this was the frontier environment itself, which often lacked traditional societal structures and strong governmental control. The guiding ethos was often that men made their own laws or none at all. This regulatory vacuum created an open environment where gambling, saloons, and yes, brothels could flourish unregulated, creating vast opportunities for entrepreneurs, including the madams themselves. The vice economy as a municipal stabilizer. A critical and often overlooked aspect of prostitution in the frontier was its role as a necessary municipal stabilizer. Commercial sex was technically illegal, but brothels operated openly and were systematically regulated by nascent local governments. Why? Because prostitution contributed significantly to town economies through business licenses, fees, and fines. This financial dependency meant that vice served as an immediate, vital, and consistent tax base for cash-strapped municipalities. This financial reliance is what explains the political tolerance or even outright welcoming of these businesses. In loosely governed districts like Skagway, Alaska, a city council was actually assembled by a group of saloon owners and gamblers who actively tolerated the trade. In a very real sense, the vice economy provided the liquidity and basic funding needed for town governance, making it a silent, essential partner in the building of the American West. The industry was so deeply integrated that its presence was rarely concealed. Residents and visitors had a specialized lexicon, calling the prostitutes sportin' women, scarlet women, sweethearts of the night, or most famously, soiled doves. In larger settlements, brothels would cluster in designated red light districts. For example, the 1895 Traveler's Guide of Colorado was a 66-page manual designed to help a client decide which brothel was right for him. The industry was publicly acknowledged and remarkably professionally marketed. The stratified business model, 3 tiers of the Demimonde. The Wild West sex trade was a sophisticated economic machine with extreme stratification in price, service, and quality of life. A sharp pecking order separated the elite parlor house girls from the marginalized crib dwellers. The price a cowboy or miner paid, which generally ranged from $1 to $5, determined the class of woman he saw and the environment he was in. The top tier, parlor houses. At the top of the industry were the parlor houses, often called the $5 and $10 houses, that catered exclusively to the wealthy. These establishments were elegantly furnished and sometimes resembled respectable mansions. They were generally run by highly capable madams, many of whom were former prostitutes themselves. A parlor house was much more than just a brothel. It was an exclusive gentleman's social club where wealthy men would make business and political connections. They would enjoy exquisite dinners, high-end offerings like champagne suppers, choice cigars, bonded bourbon, and the finest liquors and wines. The women in these houses were the best dressed and the most expensive, and sometimes appointments were even necessary. The middle and bottom tiers. Falling in the middle were the saloon girls. They were found in dance halls and saloons, sometimes working out of a room above the local tavern. While not all dance hall girls were prostitutes, saloon girls were almost universally in the sex trade and were the most prevalent type encountered by frontiersmen. They offered services at a middle-range affordability level. At the very bottom were the crib girls. These women worked in $1 houses, visited by the working class. They occupied dilapidated single-room shacks, or cribs, located on the outskirts of town, representing the most brutal reality of the trade. By cowboy standards, they were often considered the least attractive and were frequently older prostitutes, women suffering from drug addiction, commonly laudanum, a mix of opium and alcohol, or women from marginalized ethnic groups deemed less sexually desirable, such as Chinese or Native American immigrants. This stratification confined the most vulnerable populations to the least profitable and most dangerous conditions. The madam is risk manager. The vice trade offered unusually high financial opportunities for women due to the severe gender imbalance. Surveys suggest that prostitutes earned an average of $40 per week. To put that in perspective, that figure roughly doubled the wages of a white, male unionized construction worker of the time. This wage disparity explains why, for many women, prostitution was the highest paying opportunity available. However, these high earnings were offset by exorbitant costs, preventing most women from escaping poverty. Prostitutes were required to pay high prices to the brothel keeper for necessities like room, board, clothes, and toiletries. A common arrangement dictated that the prostitute turn over half of her earnings to the brothel keeper for overhead expenses, in addition to paying a monthly fine to the municipal court. In competitive boomtowns, madams had to be sophisticated employers. To attract and retain staff, madams had to offer considerable employment benefits that were rare for American workers of the era. These benefits included clothing, housing, meals, birth control, health care, and legal assistance. They were not charitable acts. They were essential business costs designed to mitigate high operational risks, such as violence and disease. The madam's real profit structure depended on managing these complex risks better than an independent streetwalker or an isolated crib girl. The greatest source of revenue in a brothel was not the sexual service itself, but the highly marked up liquor sales. Madams ensured that drinks were priced considerably higher than in traditional saloons, especially for premium options like bonded bourbon, wines, and champagne. Iron fists and velvet gloves, the iconic madams and their scandals. The fame of the most notorious brothels often came directly from the character and business acumen of the madams who ran them. These women became legends of the Old West, amassing fortunes and political influence. Mattie Silks, Denver's queen. Mattie Silks established herself as one of the most famous madams of the Wild West, essentially dominating Denver's vice trade. Her Market Street brothel was the city's most popular establishment for years. Though briefly surpassed by a rival, the famous House of Mirrors, Silks' relentless business drive led her to eventually purchase the rival establishment when its owner passed away. The most compelling story associated with Silks is the lore of an actual duel she fought with rival brothel owner Kate Fulton. This dramatic confrontation between two women vying for professional dominance underscores the incredibly high stakes and fierce competition that characterize the highest echelon of the vice trade. Fanny Porter, Sanctuary for the Wild Bunch. In San Antonio, Texas, Fanny Porter ran one of the most luxurious brothels in the entire state at the turn of the 20th century. Though she advertised her property as a boarding house in city directories, it was famous for its fine glass fixtures, plush carpeting, silk sheets, and the chilled champagne she reserved for her most exclusive patrons. The establishment achieved particular notoriety for its ties to the criminal underworld. For several years, Fanny Porter's Parlor House served as a rest stop, hideout, and headquarters for Butch Cassidy and the entire Hole-in-the-Wall gang, better known as the Wild Bunch. Porter reportedly gained the respect of outlaws and lawmen alike. She once noted that the Detective Pinkerton treated her like a lady. This brothel was the site of several famous rendezvous. It is believed that Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid, met Etta Place at Fanny's place, and some accounts suggest Etta was working there either as a prostitute or chambermaid. The Wild Bunch made its last known visit in February 1901 before scattering. Porter, described as a hard and shrewd woman, operated largely without legal interference, illustrating her personal ability to manipulate local law enforcement. Dora Dufran and the origin of the cat house. Dora Dufran carved out her reputation as the leading madam in the Black Hills, operating out of Deadwood. Dora was known for her organizational skills and focus on managing her staff effectively. She maintained strict hygiene standards and implemented a code of conduct for her employees, rotating her girls between her various locations to ensure the experience remained novel for her clientele. Dufran's most enduring legacy is the linguistic contribution she made to the vice industry. She harbored an intense love for cats and maintained large collections of them in all of her brothels. As a direct result of her fondness for felines, the term cat house became synonymous with a brothel, a term that persists to this day. Pearl DeVere, Cripple Creek's $1,000 woman. In the opulent mining boomtown of Cripple Creek, Colorado, Pearl DeVere, known as the Soiled Dove of Cripple Creek, symbolized the pinnacle of high-class vice. DeVere was famously notorious for charging exorbitant prices, reportedly demanding as much as $1,000 for her personal services. This was an extraordinary sum, reflecting a clientele composed only of the wealthiest speculators. Like other high-end establishments, her immense profitability stemmed from providing an entire package of luxury services, including fine dining, exclusive cellars, and social connections, effectively turning the Parlor House into a discreet meeting place for the frontier elite. The tragic legend of Julia Boulette. The story of Julia Boulette, the esteemed madam of Virginia City, Nevada, serves as a grim counterpoint to the prosperity enjoyed by the highest-tier madams. Boulette moved to the lively mining boomtown around 1863, operating an independent small rented cottage. On the morning of January 20th, 1867, Boulette was found brutally murdered in her home, having been strangled, struck with a pistol, and bludgeoned with a piece of firewood. The brutal attack was a stark reminder of the persistent threat of violence surrounding even well-regarded independent operators. While later chroniclers elevated Boulette to folk heroine status, portraying her with immense wealth and beauty, historical accounts suggest she was actually ill and in debt at the time of her passing, demonstrating that the line between success and tragic vulnerability remained thin in the vice trade. Systemic scandals, corruption, and the hidden horror. The most profound scandals of the Wild West brothel industry were not the personal dramas of the madams, but the systemic compromises that sustained the trade, encompassing widespread political corruption and brutal exploitation. The unspoken contract, political complicity. Prostitution was sustained by a complex, mutually beneficial relationship between brothel operators, local politicians, and law enforcement. Though generally illegal, the vice trade was openly tolerated because it generated that indispensable revenue for local governments through fees and fines. Madams understood that their operational freedom hinged on maintaining tenuous and unequal relationships with law enforcement officials. In some instances, the financial power of the madams was so great that they unilaterally decided where to establish new red light districts, effectively setting city policy until public outcry forced an intervention. In early boomtowns, such as San Francisco's notorious Barbary Coast, the influx of wealth and weak governmental structure provided vast opportunities for criminals and corrupt officials. Corrupt officials developed a system of political kickbacks coupled with high salaries and expensive municipal projects that eventually drained the city's treasury to near bankruptcy. Brothels, therefore, were not just a source of taxation. They were integral components of a kickback economy, enabling the looting of public funds while simultaneously providing a necessary social service for the overwhelmingly male populace. The hidden horror, exploitation, and the crib system. While some women entered the parlor house trade voluntarily for economic opportunity, the lowest tier of the industry, the cribs, was predicated on brutal exploitation and outright chattel slavery, particularly targeting marginalized ethnic groups. The occupants of the cribs were disproportionately women of color, including Native American and Chinese immigrants. This placement at the absolute bottom reflected the pervasive societal racism of the era, confining them to the least profitable, highest-risk sectors. For Chinese women in the American West, especially in San Francisco's Chinatown, the reality was often sex slavery. Anti-miscegenation laws and restrictive policies prohibiting Chinese women from immigrating created an artificial scarcity and a market for human trafficking, which corrupt officials routinely overlooked. These women were tricked or sold outright by their families and then treated as slaves by their owners in the U.S. They were forbidden from leaving, and refusal often resulted in brutal punishment or death. The existence of a high-wage competitive market for white women in parlor houses existing simultaneously with a non-competitive zero-wage forced slave labor market for Chinese women in the cribs illustrates the dual morally contradictory economic foundation of the Wild West vice industry. Deadwood's century of vice. The long history of Deadwood, South Dakota, perfectly illustrates how deeply entrenched the brothel economy became. Prostitution was Deadwood's not-so-little secret from the arrival of the first working girls in 1876 until 1980, over a century of continuous operation. Local officials feared that closing the houses would cost the town a significant part of its established economy. This interdependence led to a pragmatic legal arrangement. By the mid-20th century, an unwritten code existed where law enforcement essentially tolerated the houses, provided they followed certain rules. This included ensuring the brothels did not serve drinks during normal bar hours, and that police would assist madams by regulating unruly customers. This institutionalized cooperation ensured that business was good for everyone. The closure of Deadwood's Vice District was not instigated by local moral outrage. Instead, it was triggered by a federal investigation. Following the murder of a federal judge in Texas, the FBI launched a covert investigation in Deadwood from 1978 to 1980, seeking a possible connection or information that might have passed through the brothels. The federal raid on May 21, 1980, closed the last 4 remaining brothels, including the famous Pam's Purple Door. The fact that these houses survived local attempts to shut them down for a century, only succumbing to external federal power interested in national crime, demonstrates that local politics had created a legal immune system for the industry. The brothels of the Wild West represent one of the most complex and paradoxical institutions of the American frontier. They were simultaneously bastions of economic freedom for a few enterprising women and engines of systemic exploitation for the marginalized. The madams demonstrated profound business acumen, essentially operating as the original business oligarchs of the boomtowns. Yet, while they were powerful figures, they were generally kept at arm's length by respectable society. Their enduring lore is a testament to the unique intersection of lawlessness, extreme wealth, and opportunity that defined the American West. These women, and the notorious houses they operated, remain pivotal characters in the American narrative, embodying the radical risks and rewards of the frontier. The story of the madams and the brothel economy forces us to reconsider the entire foundation of the American frontier. Was the political complicity that allowed the vice trade to flourish an understandable necessity for towns that needed immediate capital, or was it a moral failure that enabled the worst kinds of exploitation and abuse? Let me know what you think of this complex moral dilemma in the comments below. And while you're there, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel for more authentic history. If you like this video, be sure to check out some more history we've covered right here in the top left corner.